Hello everybody, this is Pete from PA Labs, and I am here to do Chapter 6 in the arcade game. And this chapter is all about understanding arrays, how to load them, and what they are, and that sort of thing. The next chapter is going to be on structures. So, this is a lot to take in. I'm going to try to get it into one video for you. We have we have 5 or so of the book examples, and you have 2 of mine. So, in my example, we're going to talk about arrays. Now, if we had a whole bunch of names, then with what we've been given so far and taught so far, we would define a bunch of name arrays. We would have a bunch of name variables. And then we would assign a name to each of the variables. And then we could print them all off. Now, that works great if we're talking 1Z, 2Z, maybe 5, heck, maybe even 10, you might want to do it this way. But if you're going to be talking 50, 100, 200, 1,000, this quickly becomes totally and completely unmanageable. So, in steps, arrays, and lists. Now, the book exclusively uses arrays, and almost everything you're going to see in arrays works in lists as well. They both have their strong points. They both have kind of weaknesses. So, in arrays, we're going to pretty much just look at arrays here. What we do is we dimension array. Okay, so we have a dim command. And we're going to say name and type, string. And then we're going to dimension him with 4. Now, in Pure Basic and just about every other computer language, when you do such a thing, you would have 5 slots because computers start counting at 0 and go to the number. Just get used to it. That is the way things are done. Very rarely is it otherwise. Rarely, rarely, rarely. I can only think of a few examples where things would begin with 1. We're going to dimension this array with 5 values. We're going to dimension it with a 4, so we have 5 values. And we're going to then promptly load the first 4 with the same names as we have up here. And then we can debug name 2 and print Carol, or debug name 3 and print Bob. Also, we can do our for next operation and print all our names going for x is 0 to 3, and then we just debug name of x. And that will do this. Now, I'm going to run this so you can see the output. And the top half is going to be delineated by this wonderful parallel lines. All right, now on the debug sheet, blow this up nice and big, you can see we have our 4 names from the top, and then we have Carol and Bob, and then we have the 4 names from the bottom. Now, the output is the same, and if you looked at the volume of code, well, honestly, it's about the same. But there's really cool things in the next step that we're going to get to. But since this covers his first 2 of his projects, we're now going to go look at his projects and directly from the book. Now, I've modified these, and I've provided a visual for a single dimensional array. Array is in a name, and then you have index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and therefore. Okay, so this is just like mine before. We've dimensioned our array to the number 4, so we have 5 values. we're going to draw our screen, and then we're going to print our output, and we're going to see exactly what we would expect. All 5 names, press any key to continue. All right, now let's look at a multi-array. And this is a multi-dimensional array. And visually, you would think of this as a 2-dimensional plane where you have x and y coordinates, width and height. Okay, length and width, I guess, is the proper way to say it. So our coordinates then are 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3 are going down. We have row 0, row 1, 2, and 3, index column 0. So that's pretty much what you would think. That's exactly how it works. This is the location in the array, in the 2-dimensional array, to load data. And don't think that we're limited to 2 dimensions. You can do 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't know that there's a limit. I'm sure there probably is, but I myself have trouble once you get past 4. And I believe I read somewhere that NASA's defined 6 dimensions. I myself understand 4. So you have length, width, height, and then the 4th dimension is normally time. And so after that, I can't picture it in my head, but I've never personally ever used a 4-dimensional array. There's easier ways to get around it with all that overhead. So here he's doing the exact same thing from the other examples. He's specifically addressing each individual value, setting the values, and then we come down here and we spit them all out to the screen. So it's the same thing, only with an additional dimension added to our array. And there you go. Looks just the same. So now we get to the next big enhancement here. And this is the other biggie that comes along for the cool stuff you can do with arrays. And this is introducing the data section and end data section. So what this allows you to do at the bottom of any code sheet anywhere in your project, below your end even, okay? The code doesn't go past here. Well, it kind of does. We have a data section that we've defined. And in this data section, we can name segments. We can name sections of it. So we have a name data section. And I'm going to sit here and say our first data element is the integer 9 because I have 9 values. Now, we're going to play with some of this in a minute. We have 9 names here. Remember, arrays are built 0 to 8. And though this is 9, it makes sense to say that's 9. And I always leave the last one open. So I would dimension my array, name array, to be 9. And then I would load values 0 to 8. Same with armor. We can have a second section called armor. And he's got 4 values: helmet, gauntlet, breastplates, boots. And that can go on for ad nauseum. So you can have any number of sections. And you can load sections based on their naming. Okay, so let's come back up to the top. I'm going to define a name array with 10 values. Great. We define a couple variables, and then I'm going to say, hey, restore name data. Now this is a direct relationship to this name, reference to this name. So the pointer in this data section goes to right here, and he says, okay, I'm ready. So now when I read, I'm going to read the integer name count. Okay, so that's going to read the 9. And then I'm going to say, okay, for x equals 0 to name count, that value is 9 minus 1, we're going to load 0 to 8 strings. We're going to read a string from name array, and load name array. We're going to read this string and load it into this location of our array. Okay. And then we're going to come down here and say, okay, let's print. What do you think the size of our array is? Let's see, we defined him as 10. We loaded 8 items into him. So what is the size of our array? It might trick you. That might be a trick question. It might not. And then we're going to iterate from 0 to name count minus 1. And this is very standard sort of ways of doing things, is iterating to some value minus 1, because the minus 1 accounts for the 0. And then we're going to debug our name array. Now, I'm not loading armor. You could load armor first, restore armor, then restore data, and do the exact same thing over and over. You can, like I said, if I need to change this and I want to add 5 more names, I add 5 to here and make it 14. I add my 5 names here. All I got to do is make sure my array dimension has not been exceeded. So let's run this and see if what I think ought to be there and you think ought to be there match. So our array size is 10. That was my trick question. We defined an array of 10 values. That array size will always be 10. It doesn't matter how many items I load into the array. I can load 8, 9, or 10. I can load 1. There are 10 items in this array. And that's one of the elements that separates array from a list. If I loaded 8 items into a list and said, hey, list size is what? It's going to come back and say 8. An array has to be dimensioned with its size, and that is what the size is forever. Now, John and Joe and Mark, say George. George is row 4, right? So he's 0, 1, 2. He's array index 3. Now, if I get rid of Joe, Mark does not move up to Joe's slot. George does not move up to Mark's. We just have a hole at Joe with nothing, and Mark and George are in their exact same slots. If you did that with an array and you deleted Mark, George would now be 2, not 3. So that's a huge difference between arrays and lists, okay? And I have a dog barking behind me, and I hope it doesn't show up onto the video. But I'm not stopping. So we're going to move forward with the next 3 of the videos or the examples from the book, and they're all variants on exactly what I just showed you in Intro 2. Here he's going to define a named array, and it's a 2-dimensional array. And this is kind of bizarre the way he's doing this. He loops through the data to read the array, and he's going to pull from name type 0 to 3 and names 0 to 3, and he's loading it in as 0, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 1, 2, and 3, 2, 1, 2, and 3, 3, 1, 2, and 3. Now, that's fine and great, but his naming is what I have problems with. The assumption is that there are 3 names for each name type. That is the implication of what I read here. However, when I come down to his data, that is not what I see. I see we have 8 names, 10 if you count Fido and Spot as names, and then we have Killer, Tank, Millennium Hawk, a TIE Fighter, a Zapwing, and a Death Star, okay? So those are like ship names, and these are name names, and that doesn't jive in my head to his naming convention of what he's reading. But I'm going to ignore that because this is just a understanding of how you can read data. He's using these merely to reference X and Y, and load a bunch of names up into his name array. There is no real name type. They're all just names of things. He hasn't delineated who and who is what. So this works exactly like the other. And here's all of our values that we load in from the data. Now, his next example, and I get kind of confused in some of these. So he's doing the same thing with the same names. And, well, okay, I take that back. He is doing things differently. He's first loading in his names, and he's loading this name array. And then he loads a ship name array. Well, that makes a lot of sense. So he loads 12 and 3 or 12 and 4, whatever it is. So he's reading in, if we come down to the data, we have these 6, 8 names here, and then we have the 4 ship name sections, okay? And that makes a bit of sense. I would draw objection to his naming, but trivial at this point. This is just showing you examples of reading data from data section fields into arrays and then displaying them to the screen. So he's divided them up now into names, and then he's divided ship names from names and loaded his array pretty much up to snuff. The last variant on this in Chapter 6 is a look at using a value that we're reading to signify that it's the end of the list. Now, I did this what makes sense to me. Everybody has their own logic of doing things, and I have seen a world of code that uses this approach even in production data, though I would not allow it in my department when I was a manager. He's using this record right here to say we're out of data, stop. So that means he can sit here and load names in all day long, and he's going to read names all day long until he runs into the one that says stop, and then he's going to stop loading. That is a way to do it, and it is a way that works to do it. Not my favorite. I personally prefer to load in a specific count, load those records in so I know my data. Nobody's going to jack with my data outside of what I think it ought to be. Again, everybody has personal preferences. I won't say one is right or wrong. They both work. So in the grand scheme of things, my preference is no better than his. It just makes more sense to me. So we do the exact same thing. We load all the records in, spit them back out to the screen, and there you go. So that is how you use data sections to load vast amounts of data ferociously fast into your arrays so your game can fire up and load in all the armor and load in all the weapons and load in all the names of things and all of this sort of stuff. All of these pieces come in and load into their arrays, and then we start connecting data in arrays. But we're still limited here because the arrays we're playing with are still only a single value. And that makes this tremendously inefficient, okay? And that's where the next chapter is going to come in. Instead of loading in names, we're going to load people. And people have a name, and people have an address, and people have, 2 eyes or blue eyes, or, they have values associated with them. So each one of those becomes a single record in our array. So that's going to be the next chapter in this, and it's going to be really fun because I'm going to go way outside the book scope because he's just going to introduce structures and how to use structures. And I want to tie a lot more together with that, because in Pure Basic, structures are just magnificent and they are very, very powerful. So anyhow, that concludes this video. Chapter 6 is down and done, and I'm going to begin working on number 7. I want to thank you all, as always, for watching.